morning and welcome to today's Almost Daily Devotional. We are moving on to Philippians, the letter of Philippians from Paul. And this is going to be chapter 4, and we're going to start with the 4th verse. It goes like this. Be glad in the Lord always. Again, I say be glad. Let your gentleness show in your treatment of all people. The Lord is near. Don't be anxious about anything. Rather, bring up all your requests to God in your prayers and petitions, along with giving thanks. Then the peace of God that exceeds all understanding will keep your hearts and minds safe in Christ Jesus. From now on, brothers and sisters, if anything is excellent and if anything is admirable, focus your thoughts on these things: all that is true, all that is holy, all that is just, all that is pure, all that is lovely, and all that is worthy of praise. Practice these things, whatever you've learned, received, heard, or saw in us. The God of peace will be with you. So this is a exhortation from Paul. It's written. Philippians is a letter that was written jointly by Paul and Timothy. So likely Paul dictated the letter, and Timothy was his scribe. But Timothy also gets credit for writing portions of it. So it comes from both of them. And it's written during Paul's Roman captivity. So if you remember a couple weeks ago, as we were reading through Acts, we talked about how Paul spent 2 years under house arrest in Rome before he was brought before Caesar. And so most of Philippians, most of this book, was written while he was captive in his house. He was under house arrest in Rome. And he's writing to a church which is very dear to him, which has always brought him blessings and joy, which is not true for every church that Paul planted or worked with. But the people in Philippi were dear to him. They were supporters of him. They're the type of people that you turn to when things were going rough so you could feel a little better about yourself. And so he's writing to them as sort of a last reminder, a last word before he dies. And his word is this: don't be anxious and don't worry and don't be upset. Now, that is an easier said than done proposition, and I'm not entirely sure it's good advice. You see, we tell people not to worry or not to be upset when we can't handle their emotions. So, when my kids throw a fit on the floor and they're out of control, and I say, "You're being ridiculous. You're being ridiculous. This is way out of proportion to what you should be feeling right now." But to them, it's really, really hurtful, whatever just happened. And so we don't want to squash, we don't want to hide or put a lid on our feelings, on how we are experiencing a moment, because those emotions have to be dealt with. We have to understand and cope with the feelings that those experiences of trauma, those experiences of worry, those experiences of anxiety bring to us. Because just ignoring it or just trying to pretend like our anxiety doesn't exist or our grief doesn't exist prolongs the depth of that experience. It prolongs the impact of those events. And so it's not great advice from Paul emotionally or psychologically or socially to, pretend like you're happy all the time, which is how we understand this verse. And so what is Paul really trying to say? What Paul is really trying to say is that if we keep our focus on God and not ourselves, if we keep our focus on each other in our community, then oftentimes what happens is we find a place where we can share. We find a place where we can talk about those things, those emotions, and so they don't consume so much of our focus and so much of our attention. When we find a place where we can be open and honest about our anxieties and our worries and our fears and our grief, then we can give them over to God. And that is how we find the ability to rejoice. It's not a fake rejoicing. It's not fake happiness. It's not pretending like we're not hurt. It's not pretending like we don't have those worries and those fears. It's about giving those fears over to God so that God can fill us back up. So it depends a lot on where we're focusing and where we turn our eyes in those moments. And do we try to fix it ourselves or hide it so that others can't carry some of our burden. God asks us to share. God bless.